Miguel, welcome to the podcast. I am very honored to have you here. We are going to be talking about a topic that is likely new to most of my listeners. We haven't had somebody talk about chronic fatigue syndrome on the podcast before, but it is called optimal metabolism. And obviously, if you're dealing with CFS or pain, fibromyalgia, long COVID, your metabolism likely is not optimal. So, we're going to talk all about these topics, and I know I'm going to learn a lot. And I would imagine if the listener themselves isn't dealing with some sort of chronic pain, they know somebody who is. I know in my family, I have a family member who's very dear to me who suffers from chronic pain just about every single day. So I'm hoping what I learn here I can pass along to her, and we can get her in a better spot pain wise. But I would love to start with your personal story. It's very powerful. I will let you tell it because that's why you are here. But give us your backstory and how you got so interested in being the founder of CFS Recovery.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that introduction. It's really interesting. Chronic fatigue syndrome, and fibromyalgia, they're very similar. They kind of fall under the same category. And actually, what really put a spotlight on the whole space was long COVID. Like that's actually very, very similar, if not nearly identical to chronic fatigue syndrome. So the reason I actually started CFS Recovery, it's interesting. I have my own personal experience with going through all my debilitating symptoms, with being bedridden, being housebound, seeing all these doctors and having them look at me like I'm kind of crazy. So I fully understand what all these people are going through. And, I personally went through it myself. Now, for me, if we rewind the clock a little bit, I actually came down with all of these symptoms. It really hit me when I was about 19 years old. And I think I was 18 and a half, actually. But leading up to that, there were a lot of early signs. And I think a lot of people, if they look back and they're dealing with fibromyalgia or CFS right now, if they look back, they'll also see some early signs as well. So, just some backstory so people understand kind of what led up to this. I was always just a regular kid. I felt like I loved playing outside, grew up in Vancouver, BC, had one brother. I always loved being active, was always go, go, go mode, um, always into sports. I was that kid who just could not sit still in class. So I was physically very active, but also my mind was always racing. I didn't know it back then, but I guess now I would call it extreme type A personality, always in problem solving mode, always analytical, always doing these different things. And so I became this person who just would overanalyze almost everything from homework to sports, things like that. And down the road, as I got into high school and I graduated and everything, I took that same mentality into almost everything I did, which did eventually lead me to, I guess, pushing myself maybe too hard. Well, not maybe, definitely too hard, relying on a lot of energy drinks, pre-workouts, overworking myself. My metabolism was, it was a complete mess, right? So on the outside, I just wanted to be very productive. But on the inside, my body was just taking a beating until eventually my body hit a complete wall. And it started with just some anxiety. At the time, I didn't know what anxiety was, but I was just, my heart rate was high. I couldn't sleep. I was always stressed out. Like I always had this feeling of impending doom or something bad's going to happen. That's just around the corner. Until eventually I started getting heart palpitations, then severe insomnia, then brain fog. And then one day it all just hit me. And then I got like 40 symptoms that day, had to go to the hospital, couldn't really move around. And that's kind of how it all started. And when I was about 18 and a half, that's when my life changed forever. And that's when I kind of fell into the illness for the next 4.5 to 5 years. And it was wild. It's like my world was turned upside down, essentially. It's like you're an athlete your whole life. Next thing you know, you can't even, you can barely walk up the stairs. So it's a very interesting window of time there. But that's kind of how I fell into the CFS stuff.
So you were really young. You remind me of my middle son who's had some health issues, but he's just an anxious kid, always super athletic, always has to be moving. Like if you watch him sitting, he's not just sitting, just sitting, nail biting, he sometimes has insomnia. So yes, I think this episode is going to be helpful for so many people. And like you said, I think most chronic disease, we talk a lot about diabetes and blood sugar issues and metabolic flexibility and metabolic disease here on this podcast, but there are so many subtle signs leading up to any chronic disease. I think for the most part, I think in very few circumstances is it like, boom, just like you're completely healthy one day
Yeah.
and the next day and the next day you're not. But I feel like with pain syndromes or anything where you're dealing with chronic pain, there's got to be so much gaslighting in that arena because it's not something you can see. It's a lot of times not showing up on testing and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure people are just really frustrated, and this is going to bring them a breath of fresh air. Would you say that people who are type A personalities and just kind of those go-getters, are they more susceptible to these conditions that we're talking about? Or is that just happened to be your case?
Absolutely. Because it was the case for me and also every single person we've worked with, minus maybe like one or two people, but we've literally worked with hundreds, if not over 1,000 people at this point. And there was maybe one person who was not type A personality, who was just super laid back, who was like, super chill. It's extremely rare to find that in somebody who develops these things, because I think what really triggers a lot of this chronic pain or these chronic symptoms that are unexplainable by the tests and scans and undetectable, a lot of what triggers it is just your stress reaching a level that your body isn't designed to handle. And everybody has different levels of thresholds. Once you go over that threshold, and it could be one thing that pushes you over that edge, right? It's not just one thing that does it. It's an accumulation of different things. But the last thing that pushes you over that edge, now you start to think, oh, that one thing did it. But no, that's the straw that broke the camel's back. So if you are a type A personality, or you're an overthinker, overanalyzer, overachiever, perfectionist, these are all things that amplify the stressors in your life. And I think a lot of stress, that is the underlying cause of most diseases in this world today. And stress, a lot of it comes down to your perception of things too, because something that's not stressful for one person can be extremely stressful for another person. Like me, I love driving, but I know some people who borderline have panic attacks every time they drive. They hate driving on highways. To them, it's a super stressful event. For me, it's like autopilot. So people have different perceptions of stress, but if you do have a type A personality or that kind of those kind of thinking habits, then yes, I think it will definitely amplify stressors, which opens up the door to developing these kind of issues down the road.
Sure. And I would imagine it just manifests itself in different ways for different people. And I know recently I've gone through some cortisol dysregulation and adrenal dysfunction, and I'm very much a type A personality. Been go, go, go for the last 20 years of my life for sure. And just not taking time to rest. I started to have like eye twitching and
Yep.
had bloating issues for a really long time, and I never connected it to my adrenal health. But yeah, I've had to slow down and take some steps back and change my lifestyle for sure in order to overcome the adrenal fatigue. Thankfully, it didn't manifest itself as pain for me, but I was probably on the road to that if I didn't make some changes. So talk to us a little bit about, I mean, you were really sick. It's not like you were just had some headaches or you had a little bit of anxiety. Like you were hospitalized for a long period of time, correct?
Yeah. I was hospital. No, I wasn't. I got rushed to emergency maybe 5 or 6 times over that 4.5 year period. But for the last 8 months of that 4.5 year period, before I really turned things around, learned what was going on, and figured out how to recover, those last 8 months that felt like 2 or 3, 5 different lifetimes. Because every single day for those 8 months, I was in bed, staring at a ceiling, could barely move, and I was bedridden. I was getting spoon fed every single day. I couldn't take a shower for months sometimes. And even people nowadays, when I share some of my story because they ask about it, it's hard painting that picture for them, or relaying how serious the situation was. I say I was bedridden, and they're like, "Oh, that sounds rough." And I was like, "Yeah, I didn't take a shower for months." Like, "Oh, it was that bad?" And I say, "Yes. When I say bedridden, I mean I could not roll over in bed some days. I would try to roll over, and it felt like I was being electrocuted, or that someone was holding a blowtorch to my body. Like, it just extreme pain on top of about 40 other symptoms. So I had to wear an eye mask for months because any little bit of light would trigger an immediate migraine for 2 days. I had to wear earplugs. In fact, I had to wear earplugs, and on top of that, like construction headphones to muffle out the sound, because I found that my grandma would bring me food to my room, and she would just silently close the door, just the door clicking. That would trigger pain in my body and, cause my heart rate to go up. So I was extremely sensitive. And, for those 8 months, the 6 months, I was living with my grandparents. They were my complete lifeline. And the last 2 months, it got so bad because it got to a point where I just couldn't digest food. And there's a few reasons for that. Like, I was working with a naturopath because the doctors weren't helping. So this naturopath, we were just pumping me full of supplements. And then he was like, "Hey, we got to detox you because you probably have mold." We didn't know if I had mold. It was just a guess. But anyways, that put my body into the trenches. And then also at the time, my grandpa, who was taking care of me, he was pushing me up the stairs after coming back from doctor's appointments. He was carrying me into doctor's appointments. He was wiping me down in bed, brushing my teeth, massaging my calves when I was like crying at night, telling me it's going to be okay. So he was my lifeline. And then I saw him getting sicker and sicker as I was trying to recover. And actually, 6 months in, he passed away. He had a stroke. So this guy was like my lifeline. He was my world, him and my grandma. And, I looked at him as he was like one of my main caretakers. So without him every day, that really messed with my mind. And, things just spiraled downhill. So I ended up in the hospital because my whole body was really starting to shut down. I was in ICU for about a month. They were running every test on me they could. They were just pumping me full of medication to try anything. So that 1 month was the hardest month of my life. I didn't get much sleep. My body was just in shock. But then the month after that, the second month in the hospital, that's when I met my doctor, and who helped me come out of this and really turn things around. And it was pretty bad, basically. This is like the surface level explanation of it, but you can imagine how bad it was if I was in the hospital for that long.
Right. Yeah. And you're just talking about it for 5 or 10 minutes. Like, imagine feeling that. And
For
and
months.
like you said, the one of the hardest things I feel with pain that just doesn't go away is sleeping. Like, you can't sleep. And if you do fall asleep for a little bit, you wake up and you're like, oh, you almost just don't want to wake up because you're just in such a horrible place. So yeah, talk about stress. And you're only in your 20s at that
Yeah.
point. So
Yeah.
it's not like you were, 85, and in
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
checkout lane, so to say. But yeah, that's just it's just crazy to think about somebody, young and healthy and or seemingly healthy up until that point to be hospitalized for that long. So what was showing up on your test? Was anything coming back abnormal? And I would imagine they're just shaking their head and not knowing what to do for you.
No, nothing was showing up abnormal. In fact, they were, I've had some doctors tell me, you have a really healthy test. I wish I had these results. And then when you hear something like that, and, you know, a lot of the times you're kind of hoping, you're crossing your fingers that they find something in the test.
Yeah.
There were so many times where I was like, please tell me like one of my organs is going out, because at least we can fix it, or tell me I have something, at least we can start treatment. I think something worse, the the worst feeling the worst feeling going through all this stuff, it's not knowing what's going on. So when you can't put a label on it and they can't say, hey, this is what's causing it, or this is what's going on, you're left with like a lot of frustration. Then you're left to your own devices. So now you start to go try to figure this out on your own. So you're
Right.
going down the Google rabbit holes, which that never ends well, right? You search up anything, it's going to show you have like 30 days to live. So that was just a horrible downward spiral for me. And I had so many tests done. I can't even remember. It's like x-rays, CAT scans, ultrasounds, Holter monitor tests, um, so many different so many different blood tests. But the only thing that remotely fell outside the normal ranges, well, this is actually within normal ranges, it was borderline abnormal, was like my thyroid. But even that, it's still within normal ranges. That doesn't explain feeling 50 symptoms and not being able to walk. Like that, it shouldn't explain that. So I think that's a whole nother part of dealing with chronic illness. It's not even just a physical battle. Sure, the symptoms are hard, the pain is difficult, but what's more difficult than that is the psychological aspect, because you lose your identity, you lose like the previous life that you have, you lose a lot of friends, you lose your job for a lot of people, you pretty much lose who you are.
Right.
You lose this person you built up your whole life. Well, now if you can't do any of those things and you're just lying in a room taking up oxygen, it's like, what's the point? You know, so it's a psychological battle you deal with. And it's, I found that was sometimes more difficult than the actual physical symptoms. It's the psychological and the emotional pain that you're dealing with day to day.
Yes, and people want so badly to get a diagnosis of some sort just so they can, I think it just quantifies like, okay, I'm having these symptoms because of this, or like centralized doctors, centralized medicine, which I'm not completely against. There's a time and place for it. You get a diagnosis, then they can figure out some sort of pharmaceutical, which is usually just typically masking symptoms, but at least, you know, you have like, I'm not crazy. I have, there's something going on. So yeah, when nothing's showing up and you feel like you're dying, it's like, well, what is going on? And it's interesting that you had like the thyroid that started to tank, and I guess I'm not surprised with that for what I know about thyroid. And you know, a lot of the thyroid hormone is triggered by sunlight, especially in the UVA rise, that time period in the morning. So if you were laying in bed and, you know, had that eye mask on and no sunlight coming into your eyes, no sunlight on your skin, it doesn't surprise me that the thyroid was, you know, starting to falter and not working optimally. But tell us about the doctor then who you met, who started to turn things around, and how did you start to turn that ship and, you know, start to recover? Because I'm sure people like, okay, well, now he's sitting here on an interview and he helps other people recover. He was bedridden. How, who
Mm-hmm.
did you meet, and how did you start to shift things?
Yeah, so I got really lucky in meeting my doctor. Well, I say lucky, I mean, I guess we crossed paths at the perfect time, because I got lucky, but I was like, felt like I was dying in a hospital and bedridden for 8 months. And also, just one more thing on the previous question, I actually did have some things come back on my test for my adrenals. My adrenals were shot. So on paper, I was diagnosed with adrenocorticoid insufficiency, which is like stage 2 or stage 3 adrenal fatigue, which was terrifying when I Googled it. So we were treating it as that, but we had to, what we didn't do was dig deeper into why I was dealing with that, why that was happening. So this is where my other doctor came in. And when I met him, it was, it was the right timing, because he introduced me to all these ideas that I probably wouldn't have been open to a year prior. But because I was in the trenches, I was so desperate. I was at the point where, you know, you tell me to eat cardboard, I would eat cardboard if that meant getting better. I'll do whatever it takes. Because at this point, when I met him, I was 7 months into being completely bedridden, 1 month into ICU, being spoon fed. Like at that point, honestly, I was questioning, what is the point? Why am I even waking up? I'm just suffering, just taking up space and resources. They were trying medication, nothing was working. All my tests were coming back normal. So at that point, they said, look, your organs are completely fine. You're clearly not going to just die, even though it feels like that. You're obviously dealing with something. So if this is not a body issue, you are feeling symptoms, we're not denying that. But if your organs are functioning perfectly fine, it's likely that there's something going on in the brain that's triggering these symptoms. And it's interesting because they gave me two options after my first month in ICU. They said, look, we want to pair you up with a psychiatrist. He might be able to figure out what's going on. He thinks he has a good idea. But you have two options. One, we could send you home because we need these beds in the ICU. There's actual people who need these beds, who need urgent care. You're not urgent right now. You're not going to die if we send you home. So one, you could go home, you could come back to the hospital every day to work with this doctor. So immediately in my mind, I'm like, no, that's not an option. I can't even roll over.
Yeah.
how am I going to get there? I can't even get to the car. So option two is, hey, we have extra rooms in the psychiatric ward, so you can stay there, and you'd be volunteering. You can go home anytime you want, but at least the doctor's room is right down the hallway. I was like, really? You guys are going to put me there?
Yeah.
You guys think I'm crazy? They said, no, no. That's why you're a volunteer. You can leave anytime you want. There's just extra beds. I was like, okay, I don't really have a choice. So they wheel me over there. And I remember telling my dad, because he helped bring my stuff, I don't belong here. He was just like, just try it for one day, see how it is. But that's where I met my psychiatrist. And, the first day I met him, I remember they rolled me into his office in a wheelchair and I was shaking. Not because I was nervous, but my body wasn't used to it. I hadn't sat up in so long. So I was shaking. I was out of breath. Could barely hold my head up. But he just looks at me and he goes, and this is after seeing about 35 different doctors and specialists who had no idea what was going on. He looks at me and he just smiles and he says, Miguel, I looked at your charts. I know exactly what's going on with you and I know what to do to fix you. I've seen other people like you. And in 3 months, you're going to be walking around like a normal person. And he just smirked at me. And I was like, what? Is okay. I was kind of like shocked, but this was the first time anybody told me they had some kind of idea of what's going on or how to help me. And the fact that he did it with so much confidence, it just gave me reassurance that, okay, like I have nothing to lose here. So whatever he's saying, he seems pretty confident. I have nothing else to latch onto. So I'm going to go all in on what he says. Forget everything I read online about Google and CFS, how you can't recover from it. Forget all that. Let's hear what he has to say. And then he started drawing out these diagrams of how the stress threshold works, how your nervous system works, how basically your brain and your nervous system, it's kind of like a software where if there is a glitch in that software, your brain is going to be sending the wrong signals to your body and the wrong sensations. It's going to be experiencing things up here that is not actually happening in the body. So to me, it's real. They are real symptoms, but it's not actually occurring in the body, which is why every time they do tests, everything comes back completely fine. It's because it's all being processed in the brain. So when he taught me that and he broke everything down into very simple analogies and diagrams, and a lot of this is the foundation of what I've built CFS recovery off of, it made perfect sense to me. And when it made logical sense, it took a lot of emotion out of the whole situation. And that really, really helped things get on track because it's hard, nearly impossible to recover if you're stuck in this emotional state. So that's a story of me meeting my doctor. It was like winning the lottery, basically.
Yes, just what you needed. And thankfully, you didn't go home and walk away from that situation. So super interesting. And I know from listening to you on other interviews and looking at your recovery program that neuroplasticity, I can never say that correctly, is how you started to recover. Brad, can you tell us about what that is and how that made a difference in your life?
Absolutely. So neuroplasticity, and first off, some people who hear that whole term neuroplasticity and brain retraining, a lot of people, and myself included, immediately there's like a knee-jerk reaction like, oh, you're saying this is all in my head. You're saying I could just think myself better. Oh, you can't just think positive and all of a sudden you go from bedridden to walking. And I fully understand, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an actual physical process that happens in the brain through neuroplasticity. So the definition of neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change itself and improve, right? So the brain is plastic, think plasticity. It's able to change and adapt. So everybody who gets this, at one point, they were healthy. They were able to walk around. They were able to go through life without any chronic symptoms or pain. And then through neuroplastic change, it changed, right? Now they have chronic pain. So they've gone from fully functional to non-functional or barely functional. So if your body and your nervous system can get worse, it can also get better, right? It has the ability to do that. And so the way my doctor described it to me, it's basically the symptoms that we're feeling, whether it's pain, heart palpitations, shortness of breath, or the 50 other symptoms that you could experience, all it is, it's an alarm system from your brain trying to protect you from yourself or from any potential danger. Because up to this point, what we've shown our nervous system is that we constantly expose it to stressors and potential dangers. Now, there's a part of your brain that its main role is to keep you alive, to keep you away from danger and from stress. Now, in today's world, anything could be stressful. Driving could be stressful. So we've lost our perception of what stress is. Getting cut off in traffic nowadays, your brain can think that's a lion jumping out at you. Well, 1,000 years ago, that would be a lion jumping out at you in the jungle. Now it's a car cutting you off. So we've lost our perception of stress. And essentially, because you've placed yourself in situations or scenarios where you are exposed to all of these stressors, and it may not even be your fault. You could be walking down a street and there could be a car accident right in front of you. Boom, traumatic experience that triggers in your brain as very stressful. So you have enough of those stressful events that accumulates over time. And we all have this threshold. Once you go over that, boom, now your nervous system is in complete survival mode, fight or flight mode. So what it says is, hey, we need to pump the brakes here. We don't trust you to go out into the wilderness, out into the world, because you're just going to keep exposing us to danger. The only way we can stop you, because it can't talk to you, it doesn't speak language. The language it speaks is symptoms and primal things and emotions. So it's going to give you tons of anxiety to leave the house. It's going to give you tons of symptoms. It's going to make your legs hurt so you can't walk out the door. It's going to give you brain fog so you can't go out and talk to a whole bunch of people. And all of these different, it'll even give you sensitivity to light and sound so you can avoid situations where you're in public. So all of these things, it's designed to protect you. And so that area of your brain is your amygdala. So this is getting a bit more scientific with the neuroplasticity stuff. It's your amygdala. It's completely lit up. So your survival center, your fight or flight center, the area that's supposed to keep you alive and do whatever it takes, that is completely lit up. And that's all the emotional centers. Now, the emotional centers are through the roof. The logical centers have been kind of down regulated because the blood flow can only go to so many parts of your brain. So emotions are extremely high, logic is low, which is why when people are flaring up the worst, they're not really thinking rationally. You think you're going to die in the next 30 seconds, or you see a mole on your arm, you think you have skin cancer now, right? There's a lot of these things going on. So what we have to do, here's a solution to this, is we have to recalibrate the different areas of your brain. We need to wake up the logic centers and downregulate the emotional centers. And we do that, one, through logic. It's understanding what's going on. When you understand what's going on, and you can really just see this as, this is a hypersensitive nervous system issue. This is a glitch in my nervous system. It's not my legs going to shut down. It's not my lungs are going to shut down. My heart's going to explode. It's just a glitch. That's all it is. Once it starts to make logical sense, well, now logic starts to come back up in your brain. You're exercising those different parts of your brain, which means those emotional centers are coming down, right? So you're less in a survival and fight or flight mode. So one, it's the educational piece. So that's why he taught me all these things. He drew diagrams, gave analogies, made sure I understood, why am I even feeling these symptoms? What's happening to me? Am I going to die? Once you understand what's going on, then the second part is really just responding well to symptoms. Because, for example, with fibromyalgia patients, when they get a pain flare up, the immediate reaction is to get frustrated, which makes sense, right? Because it's unpredictable, the pain sometimes. It's to get frustrated, to get upset, to get sad, to start thinking about worst case scenarios, to start thinking about, am I ever going to get my life back? Will I ever run again? Last week I was able to walk outside. How come today I can't? That must mean I'm getting worse. All these different things, you could very easily start to go on a downward spiral. So it's a very slippery slope with these symptoms. So the second part of the solution is responding well to symptoms, because when you can respond well and stay as emotionally neutral as possible, you're not feeding those emotional centers in your brain, which are triggering the symptoms in the first place. Because the cycle that people fall into is they'll feel physical symptoms or sensations, then they'll start to have lots of emotions about it: fear, panic, danger, right? And the more fear and panic you have, danger and negative emotions, the higher the symptoms get. Higher the symptoms are, higher emotions, higher symptoms. So it's like a vicious cycle. So you need to break that cycle, right? By adding in logic, by telling yourself, this is just a hypersensitive nervous system. I understand what's going on. This is part of it. This is no different than me going to the gym, having a great workout and getting sore. It's my body adapting to different types of stimulus. When you can look at it that way, you take emotion out of it. That's number two, is responding well to symptoms, not going on a downward spiral, handling the symptoms well, keeping your composure. And number three is just building threshold. So we call it progress cycles, actually. And it's very similar to exercising or working out. What we have to do is condition not just your physical body, but your nervous system to all these different stimulus again. Going to the gym is quite simple. You do 5 push-ups one day, take a rest day, do 6 push-ups the next day, rest day, and you keep building on top of that. But with the nervous system, there's a lot of factors. It's not just physical stimulus. What's even more impactful than physical stimulus is actually emotional stimulus and cognitive stimulus. That's why people can be bedridden, do nothing physical, and they could continue to get worse and worse and decline. It's because their mind is running 1,000 miles an hour every day, which is more exhausting than actually just walking. And people don't realize that. Or they're going on their phone for 10 hours a day because they can't get out of bed. So that in itself, it's more draining on the nervous system than just standing up and doing something. So we separate it into 3 buckets, like physical, emotional, and cognitive buckets. You have to have a balance in those when you're recovering. And people never really pay attention to those other 2, the cognitive and emotional. But building threshold, that's essentially the third step. And you have to be pretty strategic about it. A lot of people, they just try to wing it. But if you don't have an actual plan, it can be very difficult to kind of navigate this because it can feel pretty unpredictable. There's so many factors. But that's essentially how to recalibrate the nervous system in a nutshell.
Interesting, but makes a lot of sense. So education, responding to symptoms, and building threshold are the steps that you went through with the neuroplasticity. Very interesting. Yeah, the nervous system. I mean, it just plays such a huge role with everything that goes on. And people kind of know my story and what kind of pushed me over the edge this year. I had adrenal dysfunction for a long time. I just kind of ignored it. And then my mom died this year. My dad had all these health issues. We ended moving him to assisted living, had to clean out the house. And all of a sudden, it's like I was taking care of my mom and she passed and I got through her memorial. Then all of a sudden, like my eyes twitching all the time. And, I'm always, I was bloated. I was having high blood sugars in the morning. And just all of these physical symptoms that I was like, okay, I need to take reign of this. But it's so nice. Like I said, it's just so nice to know that there are steps to recover. And if you are feeling bedridden or like you can't go another day, there is a process that will help you to, like, you are healthy and now you're not. There's a way to get back to health. And I know I would love for you to talk about long COVID a little bit, as I'm sure a lot of people are dealing with that. And this is what happened to my mother-in-law. She was very healthy and had COVID, and a couple months later, just debilitating pain in her shoulders and her legs. And, we couldn't really link it to anything. But she got COVID within the year of her husband passing, and her mom within a couple of months of each other, and just all of these stressful events. But we're still trying to get, a hold on her pain. We've done like low dose naltrexone. We've done, done the curcumin, and that's helped, but it still flares and rears its ugly head. So I'm really excited to pass this information along to her. But is there anything different with long COVID, or is it all just kind of manifesting in the same way and treated in the same way?
Yeah. So for long COVID, we actually treat it exactly the same as we treat CFS. Now with CFS and long COVID, that comes with a whole host of different symptoms. Fibromyalgia and chronic pain, that's more on the pain side of things, which is actually a much, much simpler fix. So, even for your folks, like, it just takes one simple exercise to solve that chronic pain issue. Now, if there's other issues like the fatigue, palpitations, then there's some other things you have to do. But pain is actually relatively easy to solve. And pain was one of my main things too. Like, just burning 24/7, would move around in my body. But, essentially, actually, what was the question again? I totally forgot. the
No,
question?
it's long COVID. Like,
Oh, long COVID. That's
well, I
right.
do that when people are interviewing me too. Like, I go on a little tangent, and I'm like, I can't remember the.
Yeah. Yeah.
Although
Long
I
COVID. Yeah.
remembered the question this time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
Yeah.
long
No.
COVID. If there's anything different or unique about
Yeah.
patients.
I think as long as people have gotten their tests and scans done, and I think for COVID, you could go get the blood inflammation checked and all of these things. But at the end of the day, if the doctor's hands are tied and they're not able to do anything for you, and honestly, I've even seen CFS specialists do this, where people wait for 6, 7, 8 months to go into a CFS specialist clinic, and then finally they get diagnosed. And you know what the solution is for a lot of these people? Here's a brochure. Here's how you manage it for the rest of your life. Good luck. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
what? How is that a solution? So basically, these people wait for multiple months only to be told, hey, just manage it. Here's a brochure. That doesn't sound like a solution to me. So if you're not getting any solutions from the doctors, you've had your tests and scans done, and they've pretty much done everything they can um, to try to fix this, and it's not working, or you're not making progress, that's when these principles will come in handy. That's where these will really help, because before we work with anybody, actually, we make sure, hey, you've gotten your tests and scans done, you've seen the doctors, you've done your due diligence, you left no stone unturned. Because with CFS and long COVID, it's really a process of elimination. Same thing with fibromyalgia. The way you arrive at the conclusion that that's what it is it's not anything else. So the unfortunate part about that is you do have to go through the gauntlet of testing and scans and doctors looking at you like you're crazy. You're going to be told you're perfectly normal dozens of times when you're not. So you have to go through that. But that's how you arrive at the conclusion. And if that's the case, if that's where you arrive at, then it's essentially the same fix. And actually, CFS, long COVID, fibromyalgia, even a lot of other things like even mast cell activation, we have so many of those cases.
Yes.
Um, IBS, things like that. Those all can fall under the same umbrella of a hypersensitive nervous system issue. So, regardless if people come in with a CFS diagnosis or long COVID diagnosis or fibromyalgia, sometimes they have all three actually, because they've had them overlap over the years, right? We actually use the same approach, or very, very similar approach actually. The only real difference in the approaches is how is that person's personality, because personality has a lot to do with this. How extreme are they in their thinking? Um, what are their goals? Right. So that's where we add in some personalization. But for the most part, the main principles are the same for those three things. It's a hypersensitive nervous system issue.
It's interesting that you threw IBS in there, and it makes sense. That's like a catch-all diagnosis when nobody knows why else you're having any sort of gastrointestinal, variances and issues. But yeah, I have, like I mentioned before, I had bloating for like 20 years, and it
Yeah.
definitely intensifies whenever I'm under stress, or I think, things that I eat and the pace that I'm eating, if I'm in a calm environment, if I'm chewing my food, that all plays a role too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how IBS would be, the treated in this manner as well. And I know for so many people who are diagnosed with these issues, immunomodulators are the best that mainstream medicine has, and they're so expensive, and they depress your immune system. And
Yeah.
a lot of times the side effects are even worse than if they're helping. Even, maybe they
Yeah.
5%, but and it's a lot. It is. It's like, so for someone like you who was in their 20s, like, really, am I going to go 60 years? It's just so overwhelming and debilitating to think about. So it's so interesting that there is just like like you said, a glitch, and that
Yeah.
you recover from that. How long did your recovery start to take, and have you seen yourself kind of backslide at any time, to where you're like, oh no, maybe this isn't working. I'm falling back into pain and other symptoms again.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for me, it's hard to say when definitively I crossed the line of like, okay, I 100% don't have this anymore, because it was a slow transition. But let's just say once I got on the right track, I got released from the hospital a day after my 23rd birthday. This was March 29th, 2018. And within 3 months, I was on a plane traveling to a different country. keep in mind, I was hospitalized just, 3, 4 months prior to that. Within 4 months, I was walking on my own 2 feet, going through airports, hopping on a plane. Now, I want to make it very clear for the audience, I felt a lot of symptoms. I wasn't going through without a scratch. Like, I felt symptoms. My heart was pounding, had brain fog, vision was blurry, but I knew how to handle those situations. It was still very uncomfortable, but I didn't I didn't downward spiral because I knew what was going on and I had a plan moving forward. So, I mean, I was actually functional within 3 months, but then I would have these flare ups. Then I'd have to be at home for a week or two at a time. So it was kind of like this roller coaster ride up. It wasn't a linear ride forward. It was like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I didn't see it as 1 step back because it was all part of the process. It's almost like if you're working out, if you go to the gym, you get really sore, then you have to skip the gym for the next 2 days. Is it really a step back or is it just part of the process? So that's the way I saw it. I saw my flare ups as, okay, this is getting me closer to thriving health because this is supposed to happen. Basically, you do activity, you introduce it in the right amounts, you flare up, you handle it well, and then you basically unlock a new level of health, a new level of capacity that your body grants you. Because it's not just going to grant you all your energy back at once. It doesn't trust you yet. It's going to give you little bits of energy here and there and see what you do with it, which, this is why a lot of people crash and they stay stuck in the cycle. They get a little bit of energy. Like, I feel good today. I feel normal. All right, let's go do this big event. Let me try working out. So basically, it's like your body giving you, if you're in a casino, it's like you're given a few chips and you're like, wow, I got some chips. Great. And you go all in on something and then you blow your account. You're back at zero. It's kind of like that. So it's almost like gambling with it. So you have to be strategic about it. Don't use up all your energy when you get it. Your body is going to give you this as a test to see what you do with it. If you're responsible enough to not go back to old habits and just go all out and start adding on stress. So for me, I knew it was 2 steps forward and then there's going to be a slower time where I have to pump the brakes, then I hit the gas, pump the brakes. But I think for me to feel zero symptoms and to be able to work out 5 times a week and work more than full time and travel and basically do everything I could and more than I could before, it took about 3 years after getting out of the hospital. Now we've seen people do it way faster because most people aren't as bad as I was, when I was in the hospital. So, I mean, we've literally seen people come in bedridden or couch bound, not leaving their house for months, if not years. And then within 6 months, they're traveling with very minimal symptoms or working full time. So, the time of your illness, the time that you're sick for, does not really correlate to how fast it takes to recover. What really matters, what makes a difference is the intensity of focus on the brain you're training, and also just how consistent you are with it, and getting out of your own way. How fast are you able to let go of old habits and patterns and letting go of control and just learning to stop and smell the roses, learning to not rush through life and just enjoy the moment and stay in your 3 foot world versus overthinking. So those are the main factors of how fast but for me, it was about 3 years.
Fascinating. Yeah. Well, you were up and walking within 3 months, like your doctor said you would be. So
Yeah,
that
he was
was,
right. He
but
was right.
I think you said, I'm glad that I'm not glad that it took you 3 years, but I do think people need to be realistic in that, this isn't, I mean, you were an extreme case, but with anything that we've talked about on the podcast, there's just not an overnight. There's not like a supplement that's just going to fix everything. And, you're just going to wake up a completely different person within a week. I mean,
Yeah.
you do the work, you got to go through the process in order to heal. I would love to, I'm a dietitian, so I got to ask, like, did nutrition play a role at all? Or, was there any kind of, nutritional healing that had to happen, or was it mainly just all the brain rewiring that worked for you?
Yeah, it was mainly all the brain rewiring that worked for me. Now, they did give me some medication in the hospital as well, just because I mean, I could barely breathe lying down. So they temporarily gave me some medication, which did help. But in terms of diet, what's interesting is when I was at my grandparents' place, I was eating super healthy. No sugar, no fried stuff like salads, chicken, salmon, broth every single day, lemon water, sweet potatoes, eggs, avocados for 6 months. But I was declining because I was putting all this emphasis on an external factor to try to fix me. Supplements, nutrition, special device that could help fix me. But when I got to the hospital, once I realized that, oh, this is my nervous system, I actually started eating not the best. I was eating like cookies, and I was staying in the psych ward in that wing of the hospital. So they
Yeah.
had like cooking classes, right? So we'd make pizzas together. I'd be eating pizzas. We'd have like movie night. I'd be eating popcorn. But the crazy thing is, my diet went from super healthy to very unhealthy, eating whatever I want. And then I was making tons and tons of progress. And I was like, how is this possible? Because just a month ago, I'd have a tiny bit of a cookie or try even a little bit of a chocolate. That would give me a migraine. But now I'm not reacting to it. So it was really interesting. And I think, mentally, I feel like I needed that junk food because I was deprived of it for so long. But nowadays I eat very healthy because I know I feel way better when I eat healthier, think clearer, I have more clean energy. I could sleep better. So now I try to eat healthy. But when I was recovering, I actually gained about 60 pounds because I
Oh,
lost a whole bunch of weight. Yeah, I went from 170 to 125 or 130 when I was bedridden, and I went from 130 to 200 pounds in about a year because I ate everything in my path. But to my surprise, I was recovering at a pretty fast rate. So it was really interesting to see.
that is really interesting. I had to ask, and and I'm
Yeah,
sure it's different for every single person.
yeah,
Like for some people, nutritionally, that does set off symptoms, but that it's so personal. And then,
yeah.
for me, with covering my nervous system, being outside in nature, grounding,
Yes.
trying to take
Yeah.
myself out of EMF, taking myself, like I stopped wearing an Apple Watch. This is a different watch that has no EMF in it, no Bluetooth. Did that play a role for you too, or not too much?
Absolutely. Especially getting out in nature. And I
Mhm.
think when you're dealing with chronic illness, chronic symptoms, you have so much time to yourself. You almost feel like you're living in this small bubble where you're separate from the rest of the world because no one really understands what you're going through. Everyone looks at you like you're crazy. You can't really relate to a whole bunch of people, if not anybody. So you spend a lot of time in your own thoughts and your own sensations. So I feel like you're heightened to certain things. Like my grandma could turn the lights on. I could like hear the lights. I could feel the lights
Yeah.
buzzing on my skin, right? And normally I wouldn't be able to feel that, but because you're so in tune with your body and your own thoughts, you pick up on these things. So you definitely feel a massive difference in just energy when you're inside a dark room versus being outside in nature or just being by water or being by trees and just breathing fresh air or feeling sunlight. So getting outside in nature, it was a massive help for me. And a lot of people they might think, well, if I go sit outside, it's too stimulating for me. Well, I thought so too. It's only very uncomfortable for the first 5 minutes. Because I remember the first time I went outside to breathe fresh air after 8 months, I was in a wheelchair. They wheeled me outside, they put a blanket on me, and they just left me in the sun for like 20 minutes. But that was one of the best feelings I've ever felt in my life. It was like breathing oxygen for the first time, or catching your breath when you're drowning for 8 months. It was just a breath of fresh air. And it was very difficult for the first 3 minutes. I was shaking, couldn't breathe. I'm going to crash. This is too much. And then I remember my doctor's words, don't, you got to respond well. And then, yeah, nature played a huge role, like cool showers, warm baths, Epsom salt baths, and just being out in the sun. We recommend that to all the people we work with.
I'm happy to hear you say that because I tell my clients and students go outside whenever possible, and morning sun especially. Watch the sunrise. Just set your circadian
Yes.
rhythm as
Yep.
much as possible. Blocking the blue light at night for better sleep, and just plays a big role with bringing the nervous system
Yeah.
down if it's definitely heightened. And I agree with you. Like just the sounds of nature. I used to when I almost always will walk in the morning. That's just something I've done for years and years and makes me feel good. I like to start my day with exercise. If I'm not strength training, I'm walking, but I would always listen to podcasts. I'm like, "God, I got to learn something while
Yeah.
I'm I'm like, and sometimes I even leave my dogs at home because they're just like, they're pulling or whatever. I'm like, I just need to be no phone, no AirPod. I don't wear AirPods anymore, but no, podcasts, no dogs. I'm just gonna go by myself and listen to the nature sounds. And that has been really an important part of healing for me as well. So yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
can go wrong with nature. I feel like you can't go
No.
wrong with being in the sunlight. I mean, you can overdo it, of course, but yeah, it's just a message that we should stay out of the sun and slather up. It just drives me insane.
Yeah, it's kind of like I see it as pumping the brakes on the nervous system whenever you're in nature, because we live in a world where there's a lot of technology, which is great. It's advanced mankind forward. We got all these cool things to save lives, right? Technology, I guess we're more connected in some ways, more disconnected in others, but technology is one of the main reasons there is a lot of stress in today's world. It's just the pace of life is so fast. You're getting bombarded with messages and notifications that is just like frying your dopamine centers in your brain. So it's just like go, go, go. All that screen light, uh, checking emails, social media, notifications, all of that. So your brain, I think everybody's brain, if they have a cell phone, they have some kind of social media, it is running 1,000 miles an hour every single day. So when you're in nature and you can put the phone away for just a few minutes, what you're really doing is like really pumping the brakes and calming down your nervous system. And that makes a huge difference, right? Because you can only red line your engine for so long until you start feeling anxiety or getting feelings of depression, things like that, which is very common in today's society. I think it would help society as a whole to get outside in nature more. That's why I was very thankful I played lots of sports as a kid on the soccer field, football, and that stuff, because it makes a huge difference, nature.
Yeah, it really does. And I live in Wisconsin, so it's really cold here.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah.
I'm like outside as much as possible. But as my mother-in-law always says, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So we dress in a lot of layers, but there is something to be said about having that sunlight on your skin and just
Yeah.
so good and so warming. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you'd really love my listeners to know, or anything else that was part of your recovery that we didn't talk about?
Yeah, I think one thing I do want to highlight is just giving the listeners hope and inspiration that, like, if you're in a dark place, or you feel like you can't get better because you've gone down the Google rabbit holes and you see that fibromyalgia, there's no cure. CFS, there's no cure. You have to manage it for the rest of your life, or you go into remission. Don't
Yeah.
believe that stuff. There are so many recovery stories out there proving that wrong. And at least from what I've seen in my personal experience, life is actually better than it ever was prior to getting sick. Because sure, you go through this tough period of time and you may be in the trenches right now, you're in the fire, right? But the lessons you're learning through this experience you're going to carry them with you moving forward, and you're going to be able to apply them to life after you recover. And it's going to set you up for success in the future, because this is the most difficult adversity you're ever going to face. You're going to have a next level of resiliency. And basically, you're going to know yourself better than most people know themselves. Most people are faced with these issues maybe at the end of their life, where they have a terminal illness, or they're 60 years old or 70, 80, and they actually have something where their days are limited. But if you're getting this right now, there is a way out, but it feels like it's a last chapter. But this is a springboard, it's a setup to a better future. So don't ever give up, don't ever lose hope, and actually get excited, because the things you learn now, it's going to unlock a whole new level of life you never thought possible. And
Yeah.
I can confidently say that because I've seen it so many times.
Yeah, I believe you. And there's just there's so many pain to purpose stories out there. That's how I
Yeah.
got into this and this whole, area and podcasting. And it's like you see healing and you want everyone to know it's not a progressive thing that you have to live with forever. So I imagine you work with your clients virtually. Tell us how we can, utilize your CFS recovery program, and
Mhm.
if that's open to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we have a couple different solutions for people. Our main one is Recovery Academy, the Recovery Academy. There's two versions of it: Recovery Academy and Recovery Academy Platinum. Essentially, the whole purpose of it is like a vehicle that's supposed to help someone go from point A to point B. Now, our whole motto is our goal is to help you go from surviving to thriving. Point A is surviving. Now, in that situation, a lot of times your goal is just to make it till the end of the day in one piece, is to get by without crashing. If that's point A, point B is where you have thriving health, where you could do all the things you want to do, live out your dreams, and really do it without symptoms or feeling like you're walking on eggshells and being careful about overdoing it and crashing. So there's a big gap, obviously, to get from point A to point B. Recovery Academy Platinum, that's kind of like taking a private jet from point A to point B. That's where you get access to the community, the group coaching calls, and the personalization. So lots of hands-on help. We'll build a customized, personalized plan week by week, to help you get to your goals. So that's option one. The option two is Recovery Academy, where it's kind of like taking economy class there. You'll still get to the goal. You'll still get there. Just might take a bit longer, and there's just less hands-on help. But people recover just as well through that. There's just as many people recovering through that as with the private jet option. So, we do screen for people who come in. Not anybody can just sign up, because we obviously want to make sure we can help you. The last thing we want to do is waste your time or energy, or most importantly, money on things that don't help. So, if you are a good fit, then you don't have any other health issues, you have all the symptoms that all of our clients deal with, then we'd be happy to help you get to thriving health, essentially. So those are the couple different solutions we have, and also a lot of free content on our YouTube channel.
And your YouTube channel is that also the Thriver Talk, or what is that?
It's CFS Recovery.
CFS Recovery, that's right. Okay. We'll link all of this in the show notes too. But I'm sure there's a lot of people are like, oh, yay, I've got side light here. I find it so interesting. And like I said, I have my own family members who are jittery or anxious, or and it's just like you said, it's like they want to label themselves as, I have somebody who's anxious and I have anxiety. But when you say, like, I have the symptoms, that's a whole different mindset than labeling yourself as something or someone forever, and then identifying with that.
Exactly.
So important. Feeling like, oh, well, I can't do this because of that. So, well, thank you for sharing your story and your expertise. This was a delightful interview, and I know I learned a lot, and I'm just glad that you're a voice out there, and that you developed your recovery program. And I know it was not fun to go through what you did, but now you're on the other side and teaching people how to recover. So that's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And it's the most fulfilling thing, I think, when you go through this stuff and then you're able to help other people. And it's super cool because the people who recover now, they're beacons of hope for others. It's like a domino effect where there's a big ripple effect in society. So, it's been an amazing past few years with CFS Recovery, and there's so many more things we want to do. We just can't wait to help more people. There's so many people who need this information, and they just haven't found us yet. But it's why we put out so much content online for free, just to teach people what to do with every symptom or every scenario they could think of with CFS.
Yes. Well, thanks for doing what you're doing, and keep changing lives. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks for having me on.